Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 4th PX Policy Fight Club. The motion for today is "It's time for an independent Scotland." My name is Nick Faith, I'm the Director of Communications here at Policy Exchange. I need to run you through a few rules before we kick off tonight's debate. The first rule about Fight Club is, as you all know, tell as many people as possible about it, because we want to attract as big an audience as possible for the next Fight Clubs, and potentially even hold in an external venue, although I've been told the Strangers Bar is not up for grabs. Before I introduce our stellar panel, it's important to run through some ground rules. So each speaker will have up to 7 minutes to make his opening remarks. At any point during that speech, you, the member of the audience, can make a point of information by standing up or raising a hand. The speakers can choose to accept that point or just ignore you completely. So it's completely up to you. If they do accept it, the time will be added on, and I will be, with my fancy yellow watch, monitoring that closely. Following the speaker's opening remarks, each side will have a chance to ask questions to each other. Before then, I will open up the questions to the floor, and you can ask anything you want to everybody, an individual, or each team. So, our speakers, before our speakers, we're going to have a quick vote. In front of you on your chair, there should be a green and a red piece of paper. Green should be for the motion. Red, anti the motion. If you are pro the motion that it is time for an independent Scotland, can you raise your green card? I think we know where this is going. And red, anti? Okay. That's very good. You need to write that down. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order they're going to speak. First of all, Sir Malcolm Rifkind. Born in Edinburgh, Sir Malcolm has been MP for Kensington and Chelsea since 2005. In 1974, he was elected as MP for Penland and represented that constituency until 1997. Previously, he has held ministerial positions as Secretary of State for Scotland, for Transport, Foreign Office and for Defence. And his last ministerial role in the Conservative government that ended in 1997 was that of Foreign Secretary. Pete Wishart. Pete was the SNP Chief Whip at Westminster from 2001 to 2007 and is currently the Westminster spokesperson for the Constitution, Home Affairs, Culture, Media and Sport and International Development.
Not many of us.
He was elected in May 2005 as a Member of Parliament for the Perth and North Perthshire seat, and previously he said that Britishness will be enhanced under independent Scotland. Fraser Nelson. Fraser is the editor of the Spectator. He's also a member of the advisory board of the Centre for Social Justice and the Centre for Policy Studies. Fraser attended the Nairn Academy and Dollar Academy before reading history and politics at Glasgow University. He joined the Times in 1997 as a business reporter before making the move to Scottish correspondent. Between 2001 and 2006, he was the political editor of The Scotsman. Fraser has said in the past that Scotland has some of the worst levels of poverty in the developed world, and indeed he said that foreign academics come to the east of Glasgow to study how a rich country can get social policy so wrong. Sir Simon Jenkins, our final speaker, is a journalist, author and chairman of the National Trust. He writes columns for The Guardian and for the Evening Standard, as well as being a regular TV commentator. He used to be the editor of both the Evening Standard and The Times as well. He describes himself as a lifelong devolutionist and indeed a separatist. And in a column for The Guardian last year that I reminded him of before this event started, he referred to Alex Salmond as Dracula at Cameron's milk white throat. When Dracula wants to kick the habit, Cameron pleads for more. Very Twilight. So, Sir Malcolm, please.
Thank you very much indeed. After that preliminary vote, as Tony Blair might have but didn't say, it can only get worse. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this debate. I start with this fundamental point which I think underlies this whole question. I think I'm not being unfair in saying from a nationalist position the United Kingdom was an accident of history. That some historic error was made in 1707. It shouldn't have happened then, it shouldn't have survived since, and now is a historic opportunity to reverse that terrible mistake. I start from a totally opposite proposition. that we actually, along with the English and the Welsh, occupy a very, very small island in a very large world. It is entirely reasonable, it's entirely logical, it was in some ways historically inevitable that the peoples of a small island with the common interests that you have when sharing an island, when sharing basically a language and a culture, actually also share political institutions. And it's very odd that the SNP should be willing to accept supranationalism from Brussels, that somehow the very idea that they might share political institutions with the English and Welsh, where they've shared it successfully for 300 years, that is so unthinkable. That Europe, yes, but the possibility of the United Kingdom in a political sense, no. Now, I put a second proposition, and it is that countries that have been successfully united for 300 years don't just fall apart by accident. Countries split up for one of two reasons. Occasionally it happens, and it happens for one of two reasons. The first reason is if the people of that country feel oppressed. If they feel that they shouldn't be part of that union because they are not given equal political rights, they are oppressed by a foreign power. And we know that's happened in our own history. It's what the Irish felt. It's what's happened in other parts of the old empire. And when you have a feeling of oppression, then you get great national liberators who emerge. And so Gandhi appeared in India. So Mandela appeared in South Africa. Scots don't feel oppressed. That's why we've got Alexander. If you don't feel oppressed, the only other argument for breaking up a successful union is that it's going to be remarkably better. There's some, not just an aspiration, not just we are Scots, therefore we must be free, but there are real benefits that we can only achieve, which far outweigh any of the disadvantages. Well, you know, I'm not going to make any false claims of what the SNP stand for, because I've got the document here. There's a document they produced just last week, which have been given to all their supporters, the 10 reasons to go around claiming we should be independent. And what is the first reason? The first reason, and I quote from the summary of their own document, the people of Scotland will be in charge of Scotland's future. Okay, it sounds, who can be possibly against that as an aspiration? But what does it actually mean? If it means health, education, housing, all the devolved subjects, Scots are already the people who have the last word on education policy, on housing policy, on local government, on police, on prisons, and a range of other issues. So presumably they don't mean in those areas. Well, they can't mean because they wish an independent Scotland to be part of the European Union. So they certainly can't mean agriculture, or fisheries, or trade policy, because no member of the European Union has the final say on these issues. These are matters that are discussed collectively. So we've got to put that also on one side. So what about the areas where they could, in theory, have independence that would be meaningful? Let's just take on board what they've already said. We're going to continue to enjoy the gracious majesty of our Queen. Right, marvellous. I'm not obviously against that. But they're going to have a head of state who spends most of the year living in London, in another country. But that's not the only point. When it comes to the much more fundamental question of Scotland's currency, and people in this hall will know currency doesn't just mean what notes to carry. I've already got Royal Bank of Scotland notes in my wallet. I'm prepared to admit that. But it's not just a question of the currency, it is what's attached to the currency you have. Are you part of a fiscal union or whatever? Now, they could be saying, as they said for many years, we'll join the euro. But they know that's toxic. So they can't do that anymore. They could say, we'll have our own Scottish currency. Well, that would be what you want to do if you want to be in charge of your own future. But they haven't said that. We say, we'll continue to use the euphemism, we'll continue to share England's currency, we will continue to be part of the sterling area. But actually, just think for a moment what that means. It means that an independent Scotland, having taken this historic decision in order to be in control of our own affairs, will voluntarily choose to use what will then be the currency of a foreign state, when the Bank of England really will be the Bank of England, with no responsibility for anything that happens north of the border. Now, occasionally when questioned on that, they say, well, actually, what we'd really like to see is not just use another country's currency, we want to be part of some sort of fiscal union. Well, if they mean that, and we know from the experience of Greece and a number of other European countries, fiscal union means giving supranational control to your budget deficits, to your money supply, to your interest rates, to all the things that you don't have when you want to be in charge of your own affairs. And if the fiscal union is with England, 60 million people in England, 5 million in Scotland, guess where the fundamental decisions are going to be taken. But in this case, with an independent Scotland, without Scotland having any meaningful input into that process. We've had a Scottish Chancellor of the Exchequer, Alistair Darling. We've had the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, John McFall, from a Scottish constituency. You know, I could give dozens of other examples of that kind. None of them will be possible in such a scenario, and something as fundamental as what underpins our economy. But let me move on to some other aspects of what they claim, defence. Now, I read the bigger version of the document, and they give a whole page on what an independent Scotland would mean for defence. But they've been dishonest. And dare I say it, they've been deliberately dishonest. Because the document, when it refers to their defence policy, mentions what we already knew, that they want to abolish Trident and remove that from Scotland. That's all old hat. What they don't mention in the document is they also, this official SNP policy, Nicola Sturgeon confirmed it to me last week, they are committed to Scotland coming out of NATO. Just when Kosovo wants to join, when Montenegro's join, when the Baltic states have joined, when every other part of Europe's queuing up to join, and independent Scotland, that's their policy, isn't it? You can't deny it. That is the policy of your party, and yet why are the people of Scotland not being told this in your own official document? And it's not just a theoretical point, because if Scotland and England are going to continue to have the relaxed relationship, if the border is only going to be a line on a map, that's not consistent. When the very defence of these islands will now be split by a wall, yes, a wall, with England and Wales as part of the Western Alliance, which has safeguarded our security for 60 years, but the nationalist policy is to leave NATO. No wonder you didn't put it in the document, you're ashamed of it. And you don't want any more people to know it than is actually possible. So I conclude my remarks, these opening remarks, by saying this is not just about emotion, it's not just about history, it's not just about aspirations. The nationalists have only put one argument in which, in their view, would deliver a fundamental change that comes down to oil. Take everything else away and it's oil. Let's accept, final sentences, Chairman, let's accept that their arguments that Scotland would get the bulk of the oil are correct. But we know, and it's come from independent Office of Budget Responsibility, that oil's running out. It may last for 20 years, it may last for 30 years, and then it will be down to a fraction of its current level. So what about not just your generation, Pete? Not just my generation, what about our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren? Take away the revenues from oil and they'll be gone in 30 years. Then you don't have anything to offer as to why independence will make a fundamental improvement compared to where we are now. That is the case for the Union, not based on historical sentiment, but based on the real practical realities of a small island off the northwest coast of Europe, shared political institutions successfully for 300 years, and at a time when we can share institutions with Europe, I find it rather pathetic. The nationalists no longer seem to feel able to say we can share political institutions with England as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I have to say that I was very encouraged that we somehow got almost a tenth of the audience saying yes to the notion of an independent Scotland. Can I just say,
more fit, I think.
that's even better. Can I just, we just want to be normal. We just want to be a normal, self-governing nation. Just like we find normal, self-governing nations throughout Europe, throughout the rest of the world. Common and garden, normal, self-governing nation, that is what Scotland aspires to be. We want to have the government that we vote for. We want to have the necessary powers to grow our economy. We want to represent ourselves in international institutions. We want to make our own contribution in those international institutions. It's a popular concept. There has been something like 32 countries that have become independent in the course of the last 30 years. Since 1990, some 32 countries have become independent. It isn't a radical, revolutionary idea to look after your own affairs. It's an aspiration and something that has dignity and something that is worth fighting for when you are a self-governed nation as we are just now. So it's an independence is the normal state of affairs that we find in nations around the world. And what will happen with independence? Well, the powers that are currently reserved across the road will be returned to democratic control by the Scottish people in their own parliament and their own government. There'll be no more Scottish members of parliament at Westminster. I don't think you'd want us anyway, and we certainly wouldn't want to be there if it was independent. So what happens is that we will all have these powers returned to Scotland. What continues the same? Well, the social union continues the same. The fantastic cultural relationships and partnerships that we have throughout the British Isles will be maintained and will be built upon. In fact, they'll be even better. They'll be even better because we'll come to this from a sense of equality and mutual respect. We will enhance these institutions. There will be new cross-border institutions, and they will be British institutions. I come from Perth, in the northern part of the British Isles. I'm as much British as somebody from the southern shires of England. These British institutions will be maintained and be preserved, they'll be built on because they'll be invested in, because we'll come to this from a sense of equality and partnership. That's what's on offer in the independence. The Queen will continue to be our monarch, will continue to have the pound in our pocket, and will continue to be members of the European Union. When the Scottish people wake up the day after they decided to vote for independence, yes, I've never tried this before in here, we'll see how we get on.
Well, neither, I haven't tried it very often myself, sir, but speaking as a former Eurocrat, I have only 10 years experience, I grant you. I have yet to see any provision in any of the European treaties which would permit a region of the European Union to possess the right of secession.
Well, I anticipated a question such as this, because this is some of the things we've been getting from the Unionists consistently and continually, that for some reason that Scotland would be in a unique situation where we'd be obliged to leave Europe. Well, we've heard the words of Lord Mackenzie Stewart, the judge, the former judge of the European Court of Justice, and Ian Gallagher, who very much believed that what would happen is because the United Kingdom would be splitting into two different nations, both would be in the same situation when it came to its relationship with Europe. And it's actually harder to leave Europe, as Greenland found out when they attempted to do it some years ago. So we fully anticipate, with the advice that we've received and the views and the words that we have in our back pocket, that Scotland will continue to be a member of the European Union, and we look forward to continue in that relationship. The only difference is, a member of the European Union, instead of British ministers representing us at the top table, we will be representing ourselves. We will be able to put Scotland's case in the Council of Ministers, ensuring vital interests such as fisheries are looked after by ministers who have the bulk of the fisheries in the British Isles. Yes, sir?
Can I just ask you about fisheries? At the moment, the number of votes that we have in the Council are for Britain as a whole. So that means Britain as a whole will vote in favour of a policy for fisheries that suit Britain. In reality, that suits Scotland, because it's only really Scotland that's largely affected by fisheries. What happens when you change that situation so you have fewer votes just for the same issue, because the rest of England doesn't have a direct interest in maintaining an interest in fisheries at this moment?
Well, it's a curious perspective, because what's happening with Scottish fisheries and fisheries in the North Sea is decided by some landlocked countries who have absolutely no interest in Scottish fisheries. What we will be able to secure when we become independent is that there will be Scottish ministers sitting at that top table putting Scotland's case, which isn't happening just now. And we will ensure that when we walk away from that table, the Scottish interest will be put and hopefully served, and will be persuasive enough to ensure that we will get the fishing requirements that we need as an independent nation. Now, of course, we are very positive about the way forward and the opportunities that exist for Scotland, independent Scotland. And I was quite interested in Malcolm's remarks, and it was actually quite restrained and reserved, because some of the things that we've heard from our unionist colleagues in the course of the past few years, you would think that what we were suggesting was something akin to Armageddon. The sky wouldn't just fall in, but thunderbolts would come down on an independent Scotland, such as the way that it's presented. And we heard about defence, and one of Malcolm's colleagues yesterday, I think, came up with the best one ever, when he said it might actually be necessary to bomb Scotland's airports because we'd be so poorly defended that some malign force would come into Scotland and threaten England. And Peter Fraser, a former colleague of Malcolm's, said it may be necessary for the English to bomb Scotland's airport. This is the sort of nonsense that we're getting. We're told that our embassies would be bereft of whisky, the pandas would be repatriated, we would be impoverished, we wouldn't have any currency, we'd be set adrift somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, such as the invidious agenda of us evil separatists. Nothing could be further from the truth. What England and the rest of the United Kingdom will do is gain a good neighbour, a new neighbour, and one that we will look to work in partnership and in union with when it comes to developing our own cultural relationships and new ties. But that's beginning to change a little bit, because the Prime Minister visited Scotland very, very recently, and he said something very, very significant. And he actually said that Scotland would be able to make it on his own. He conceded this. Now, he's becoming in line with a number of other unions who are now suggesting that Scotland would make it on its own. We're moving beyond the too wee, too poor, too stupid arguments now. And what we're beginning to see is this case that Scotland actually would be viable as an independent nation. And of course it would be. Scotland would be coming to independence as probably the most endowed nation that decided on its sovereignty. We are in a fiscal surplus when it comes to the rest of the United Kingdom. We have incredible opportunities with being able to have control of our own wealth, over our own resources, and Scotland would be a massive success in the world. We would be a good international neighbour, and we would be a fantastic relative of the rest of the people of the British Isles in this. What independence gives us is the government that we want, the government that we decided for. There's more giant pandas in Scotland than Conservative members of Parliament, but yet we have a Conservative government that continued to put through unwanted reforms, unwanted legislation that nobody in Scotland voted for. And with independence, we get the government that we decide. We will have the powers to grow our economy. We will be able to make our own international way in the world. That's what independence is. That's what's worth fighting for. That is the prospectus that we're going to put to the Scottish people. And we are absolutely certain that when we hear the positive case of the things that we can do with our self-sovereignty, with our self-determination, with our independence, and then listen to the nonsense from the unionists who say, you can't do it, you're not, this is impossible, like for some reason suggesting that the Scottish people uniquely amongst the peoples of the world cannot make a success of their independence. What nonsense. The Scots that invented the modern world to be told that alone amongst the peoples of Europe that we could do this is absolute nonsense. So let's hope that argument's going. We will continue to put the positive case for independence. Let's start to hear the positive case for the union, because so far we haven't heard it yet.
Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. It's a special pleasure because it gives right-wingers, Scottish right-wingers like Malcolm and myself, something we have not had for a good 20 years, which is an opportunity to be on the same side as the majority of public opinion in Scotland. I mean, it's a great, listening to Malcolm tonight, it's just a great reminder of what we've lost in Scottish politics since the great political cleansing which took place in 1997. I mean, then at least the Tory party was hated, but you got there now and it's more like pitied. I mean, voting Tory, when I used to live in Scotland, used to be a great sort of evil, and now it's seen as a kind of harmless perversion, you know, roughly in the same bracket as cross-dressing or cricket or something, you know, it's nothing bad. It's just, things are terrible for the Conservative Party, but for the Unionists, they are good and they are getting better. Because this is an argument which never really took off in Scotland. I mean, you're hearing people talk about, oh, sure, can't we be a nation of ourselves? Of course, nobody's saying Scotland can't be a nation. The question is, why would it? What would Scotland gain by basically making Alex Salmond the Prime Minister or the President or whatever aspiration he's got? And the more you think about it, the more it doesn't make sense. I mean, to listen to the SNP, as I've had the pleasure of doing for much of my journalistic career, it's as if Braveheart is on a never-ending loop in their heads, talking about Alba Bra nation, we're going to be free. I mean, this is, I mean, some of Pete's arguments. Wouldn't it be great to have a Scot going down to negotiate the fishing position? What do we think? We've just seen for the last 13 years, as far as I can make out, it was non-stop Scots in government, in Tony Blair's cabinet, being run by Gordon Brown and his many Scottish colleagues, arguing things. We know what was really terrible. Now, of course, the SNP, you can bet, were cheering on David Cameron like no other Scots in election night, because it gives them the opportunity to say that there is some now great political dichotomy, that Scotland is being cruelly oppressed, despite the fact that, as Malcolm says, it has now something got, Scotland has got a government of its own. I mean, Alex Salmond calls it the Scottish government, doesn't he, Pete? This is the language which you use now. Scotland has got a government. Now, I've got a lot of respect for Pete. Being Chief Whip in the SNP, you might not think like it's a dangerous job, but you've seen what Eric Joyce is like when he gets a few drinks. I mean, you don't want to be in control of these Scottish MPs, I tell you. They are a feisty lot, and they're never more feisty when they're talking about the only topic which they've really got left to discuss now after devolution, which is whether Scotland should be independent or not. Now, I can think about this in selfish points of view. As a Scot, I would rather not have to choose if I want a Scottish or a British passport, which assumedly I would do if Alex Salmond had his way. I was actually one, but you missed out of my city, born in Truro. I don't know if that means I would now be un-Scottish, or whether I would be, but I don't want to make foreigners out of my friends and relatives in Scotland. I don't want to use a different currency when I go home, which I might have to. If Alex Salmond joins the euro, as was his great wish, he doesn't want to at the moment, surprise, surprise, but you can't really see why. I mean, what we've seen, if we've learned nothing else in the euro crisis, we've learned what happens when you've got one independent country using the same currency as another, and yet being very irresponsible with that currency, which, alas, you can bet any independent Scottish Parliament would be. Now, I've got a confession for you that I was very home rule about 20 years ago when I too watched Braveheart. I didn't quite think it was a documentary. Certainly something stirred in my soul there, thinking, yeah, why can't Scotland? So I was in favour of voting yes for the Scottish Parliament, passionately in favour of it. And then what a horror met the eyes of Scots like me who thought that self-government would improve our country. We thought we would have a parliament equal to the majesty of our nation. That would be having young Malcolm Rifkinds and young Alex Salmonds. But instead, it seems to have just trawled the council chambers and produced the most uninspiring, moronic bunch of female politicians you could ever want to put in one parliament. I did a one-year tour of duty in the Scottish Parliament, thinking I'd go back for good to my motherland. But the stories you ended up covering was one of these MSPs who got drunk and burnt down the curtains of a hotel, so he was kicked out. That's what the legislation agenda. This is a small taste of what independent Scotland would get. They were banning fur farming, something that doesn't exist in Scotland. They basically, anything they could think of, they could ban it, whether it was, smacking or having fox hunting, but there was no imagination, there was no great advancement. What does Scotland do better than England in public policy? And this is what it boils down to, not whether Scotland could be independent, of course it could, but from the evidence of what we've seen, from the evidence of the Scottish Parliament, of this little tin pot, terrible travesty of Scottish democracy where the average MSP is way less intelligent and articulate than the average Scottish person. What did they manage to come up with, and do we want more of it? And I'm afraid to say that there is a reason why every single opinion poll in Scotland shows that those against independence are in the majority. Now, there are, I can understand, soon we're going to hear from Simon Jenkins, and I can completely understand his point of view. I've got sympathy with it. I mean, if you're English, you'd be getting pretty fed up with this at the moment. I mean, it's that old, the old joke, how do you know when Scots are on an aircraft? When the engines stop, the whining continues. And that is effectively how it seems for people like Simon. You give Scots home rule and they just keep complaining and complaining and complaining. And then Alex Salmond is out there to antagonise Simon. Simon is his strategy for independence. He wants to, charge English students to go to university in Glasgow, where I went, but make it free for Scots. He wants to have free personal care for the elderly in Scotland, but not in England. Anything that will irritate the Daily Mail, anything that will his greatest hope for independence is not popularity in Scotland, but exasperation in England. If you look at the opinion polls, it's time for an independent Scotland is a far more popular notion south of the border than it is north of the border. So I can understand Simon's argument. What I can't understand is peace. Now, I'll finish up here, but I would simply ask, what specific problem that Scotland's got would independence solve? When you think about Scotland's problems, they're hideously large. We do have the worst poverty in the developed world. The life expectancy in the part of Glasgow where my dad grew up is now 54, which is, to say it's third world is an insult to part of the third world. But do you hear this as part of the Scottish independence narrative? Do you hear a long list of actual policies that it would introduce to improve a lot of the ordinary Scot? No, you don't. You just hear cliches and half-hearted arguments about wouldn't it be great to have our own country. Well, we do. As a Scot and a Brit, I've got my own country, and it's called Britain. I love being part of it. I feel very proud to have both identities. I do not want to be asked to choose between them. And I specifically, when I'm thinking about it, do I feel so different to the English? Do you, Pete, feel so fundamentally different to this species you see below you, south of Hadrian's Wall? It's a complete joke. The majority of Scots regard it as such. And this independence will fail, not because Scotland can't do it, Scotland can, but because there is no solution to which independence is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. This is very embarrassing to intrude on this sort of private grief. A Scotsman whinging north of the border is bad enough, whinging south of it is intolerable. I'm the token Anglo-Welsh on this panel, and I do feel I'm intruding on someone else's dispute. And I can tell you, if you want to insult the Scottish Assembly, Scottish Parliament, go and try the Welsh Assembly. But it's Welsh, and yours is Scottish. And I'm English. And as far as I'm concerned, that's your business, that's the Wales's business, it's not necessarily my business. This is not a discussion about the virtues or otherwise of whether Scotland should go independent. It's a discussion of whether, if Scotland decided to go independent, it should be entitled to do so, and whether it has anything to do with England. Now, within 100 yards of where we're sitting, for the last 200 years, distinguished groups of mostly Tory people have discussed the future of the British Empire in various shapes or forms, and come out conclusively that it's a very bad idea to disband it. And every single time they've been wrong. And I just think, occasionally, we ought to stop and think of the arrogance with which we sit here in London, at the headquarters of a great imperial power, and decide what is or is a good, or ought not to happen to the subject peoples under the sun elsewhere in the world. We've almost always been wrong. Usually, I have to say, many of these peoples, and probably use the Welsh at the moment, as indeed the Scots at the moment, have broadly speaking been quite happy to be ruled in some sense or other from London. But London has been so incompetent at ruling them that eventually they've been driven to distraction and said, to hell with it, we want out. There's a wonderful moment on the Paxman programme the other day, the totally satisfactory conventional view of the British Empire, in which he's talking to an elderly Egyptian in the sports club in Cairo. He turns to this Egyptian, he says to him, just out of interest, did the British Empire do anything for you in Egypt? No. He's watching the croquet, this man's eyes are fixed on the croquet. And Paxman says, I mean, we must have done some good things for Egypt in our time. He admitted to the fact that it wasn't part of the British Empire, but Paxman thought it was. Something are you sorry we left? Yes. Are there no relics of the British Empire that you're pleased we were here about? No. Went on with the croquet. Paxman, completely nonplussed by this, because he's always assumed that basically it was a benign institution, which other people respected and regretted its departure in some shape or form. In the case of Scotland, I stand on one thing alone, self-determination. If the Scots want to go independent, they should be allowed to go into independent. It is nothing more nor less than that. The British government for the past 10 years has been fighting for the rights of independent minority parts of countries to declare their separatism. We've been fighting in Yugoslavia, fighting in Iraq, fighting in Afghanistan, fighting the Benghazis in Libya. I mean, all the time, we have in our DNA, for other people, the concept of the self-determination of provinces within various forms of confederacy. In this country, all the arguments about this, the arguments we've been hearing now, is it in the economic interest of the Scots to be independent? Is it in their political interest? Won't they be losing something or gaining something from this wonderful relationship with Britain since time immemorial? That's not the issue. In my experience, when peoples have decided they want to be separate, they will be separate, even if it costs them a fortune. The Slovakians, it didn't cost them a fortune, but they were told it would. You can argue about the Irish, but the Irish were determined to be independent, irrespective of whether it cost them a fortune or not. The issue is not the fortune, the issue is independence. Scotland has become more inclined to independence, it's not there yet, I grant you, more inclined to independence with each survey that's taken. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that sooner or later they will get it. We can argue about what it means, we can argue about whether that degree of autonomy under Europe or not under Europe is real or not. They know what it means. You have this debate in Scotland, you have a completely different conversation from the conversation we're having at the moment. I have no doubt at all that the United Kingdom, forged in the euphoria of the British Empire, will go the same that British Empire went. We all thought Ireland shouldn't go independent. Ireland did. The Edward Carson of Kensington and Chelsea here would, I'm sure, have gone purple at the prospect at the time. The fact of the matter is, peoples do sometimes decide they want a more identified polity than they have at the moment. You see it in Galicia, you see it in Catalonia, you see it in the Basque Country, you see it in Sicily, you see it in Brittany. Right across Europe, smaller provinces are demanding greater autonomy. Now, they're not secessionists, you're right, but sure as hell, if they were treated the way we have treated the Scots, they would become secessionists, and the way we treated the Irish, they did become secessionists. It's a matter, if you like, of tact. The idea of a British Prime Minister going up to Scotland and saying he'll fight with the last drop of his blood to keep Scotland under London is absurd to me. Why do they want it? Pain in the neck. I think, and this is my last point, I think that the future of the United Kingdom is not there. It's finished. I have to say, I think David Cameron's got that view more or less too. I think you're going to find the whole culture of London, you can just swing around the virtues of Scotland not being part of the United Kingdom rather than the pain of the separatism. I'm sure that's going to be the case. I think it'll be in the interest of the Conservative Party, it'll be in the interest of England, a country I love and am fascinated by, and I think that in 50, 100 years' time, we'll regard the debate we're having now much as we would have regarded the debate that we were having in the middle of the 19th century about Ireland. That's the way it's going. Thank you very much.
Expecting reference to Tory MPs as pandas or cross-dressers when we decided to hold this debate. Well, the Scottish Board's fantastic. I will give both sides the opportunity to come back at any points that either of the teams have made.
Yeah, thank you. I listened carefully to Simon. I thought it was bizarre. The comparison of Scotland with Ireland. Do you not understand the history? Scotland and England oppressed Ireland. Ireland was forced into the Union. Scotland and the Scots made as much of a contribution to governing the empire and suppressing the Irish as did the English. You must know that. And you must also know that the rest of the United Kingdom has already been acknowledged. If Scotland wants independence, it will get it. Cameron's not saying I will prevent you being independent. He's saying I will use all my power to try and persuade you not to go that route. So don't argue against something that isn't even being proposed.
Until recently, he didn't even want to ballot on it.
Well, of course, absolutely, but we acknowledge the SNP won an election in Scotland saying they would have a referendum. And instead of refusing it, which legally Westminster could be doing, you could be saying, well, you can say what you like, we're not going to do it. Westminster, actually, the English, if you prefer it that way, are saying if the Scots want to have a referendum, at the end of the day, you're going to have your referendum, and you will decide. Good. People in England will be there. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. So why haven't I done this?
Well, I think the parallel with that, are you saying the reason why Ireland is not similar to Scotland is simply because the Scottish oppressed the Irish?
Yeah, the Irish were oppressed, and they were oppressed by the British. And as far as the Irish are concerned, the Brits, not the English, it's the Brits the Irish keep referring to as their oppressors, and there were as many Scots involved in oppressing Ireland as there were Englishmen.
It's like saying the Brits, the Scots are oppressing the English because they're the voting majority in Parliament. I mean, we're discussing the status of the components of the old British Empire, the British Empire of the British Isles, which was never assimilated. It was always a confederacy. It was never recognised as a confederacy in London until the Irish succeeded.
Can I say something here? I've listened, and it's very exciting and interesting. I totally agree with Malcolm Rifkind as Scot. My brother lives in Scotland, so I'm actually thinking of Scotland. I think as far as England is concerned, I don't think it's the end of the world, but I think irresponsible politicians are driving a possibility of Scotland destroying its position, in my view. And I think it's entirely personal ambition of your leader involved on this, Salmond. I see him as a very ambitious politician who's actually creating danger to the population of Scotland, a place I love. And I think that with 300 years, they put the great in Great Britain when in fact in 1707 the Union was formed. It became Great Britain. And it has been Great Britain, with Scotland as a partner in that. And I think it's obviously, you know, football matches, rugby matches, we have this wonderful rivalry. And you now have semi-independence. And I think that anything beyond that, these suggestions are totally irresponsible as far as Scotland is concerned, in my view. I haven't seen one concrete point put to Malcolm and his colleague, whose name, please forgive me, forgot. I haven't seen one concrete point put to him that I would regard as credible. I think it's political ambition at its worst kind. that might lead the Scottish people to make a horribly wrong decision.
Thank you very much. Pete,
thank you, and I'm sure so you'll respect the views of the Scottish people, and they will have their choice on this, they will be persuaded.
Depends how the question
Can I
is.
respond to Malcolm, back to the point of Fraser? Of course Scotland isn't depressed. Nobody's ever suggested that Scotland somehow wants to have secure its independence because we've been oppressed by some malign nation down here. Of course that's not the case. Why Scotland moving towards independence is because they've learned about moving towards independence. In Fraser's case, where he says that the Scottish Parliament is more or less useless, it's just full of cronies and councillors, etc., the Scottish people will never ever go back to the conditions that Malcolm so opposed, when he opposed. You know the language and rhetoric that Malcolm uses. We heard the same thing when he opposed devolution in the Scottish Parliament back in the 1990s. We're hearing the same type of language and opposition once again. But what has been successful about Scotland has been our health service, has been our education. Our health service, we've not got the nonsense that you've got with the semi-privatisation agenda down here. In Scotland, we're not charging our students to go to university. We've got free education. With free education. So why the SNP got an overwhelming majority, as we did in May, is when Scottish interests, when Scottish institutions are being run on behalf of the people of Scotland, we do it better. So what we're saying to the Scottish people, in our perspective, is that we do education better, we do health better, we do free national care better. We reintroduce the smoking ban, we're going to have minimum prices for alcohol, so we do these big health institutional issues better too. We'll do welfare reform better, we'll defend ourselves better, we'll make our way in the world better, and the Scottish people understand that. It's saying that we are in control. The people who are best equipped to make the decisions about Scotland's future are the people of Scotland, and they will do it in their best interest. And that's the agenda that people are responding to, because they've seen the experience of us having semi-independence, and they know with real independence we'll do it even better again.
Thanks, Pete. I'm keen to open up to the floor because I'm sure there's lots of questions. Sir, over there, who had his hand raised, Bill.
Now we have got to the heart of the issue, and as a Tory and as a unionist, I would like to ask Malcolm Rifkind what his attitude is to the West Lothian question, because what a lot of us feel, Tories feel, is that devolution in a unitary state has already gone too far, that the current state of affairs is already presenting an intolerable position in the House of Commons, whereby the Scottish MPs can vote on issues which don't concern them, and which can decide matters for themselves in their own country. And the problem we have is that in the referendum that we're about to have, is it is very likely that actually we're going to end up with Devo Max, not independence, but he's going to exacerbate the situation even further. And therefore, from an English standpoint, there really is a great deal to be said now, having got this far, which I regret, because I would have always preferred that we remain where we were, but having got this far, independence could be infinitely preferable to the state of affairs that we have now and to what we might very well have after a referendum, because the Prime Minister has already said that in order to buy off independence, he will grant more devolution to Scotland.
Samantha, do you want to respond to that?
Well, as someone who has a house in East Lothian, I will offer you the East Lothian answer to the West Lothian question. It's very simple, in my view. Yes, you're right, because of devolution. It's not just Scotland. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland all have devolved parliaments, and therefore many matters which are dealt with in these three territories, are no longer dealt with in the House of Commons. So the objective is fairness. How do we give England a position where it cannot be overruled on purely English matters by the votes not just of Scotland, but Scots, Welsh or Northern Irish? And the answer is quite simple in my view. The simplest way is to require in the House of Commons, when there's any proposal for new legislation, if it is certified by the Speaker as only applying to England, it will require a double majority. A majority not just of the House of Commons, but of English members in that House of Commons. And if a majority of English members do not support that measure, it will not go forward. And it seems to me that is by far the best approach. I don't like the idea of stopping the Scots or the Welsh or the Northern Irish being able to participate in debates. That's a national solution to a unionist problem. We can't have second-class MPs. But on purely English issues, they should require a majority of English measures before the law is changed. And that would recreate a sense of fairness, which is what this United Kingdom is all about.
Son?
I mean, presumably that would lead to an English Parliament, in effect.
Yeah. No, there would be a United Kingdom government.
Yes or no?
No,
definitely not. Fraser's yes or no?
You can call that if you wanted. I mean, you'd have a parliament where the Scottish MPs would recuse
ourselves. You could have been, I mean, I like Malcolm, think it's a lot fair. I don't think it's fair that Scottish MPs made a difference on the Blair NHS reform, which I supported. But I didn't think it was fair that the English MPs voted against them, by and large. Nor do I think it's fair that in 2005 more people voted Tory than voted Labour at the election, and still Blair was taking, you know.
But after Devo Max, which is going to come, after
Devo Max is Devo Plus.
More Devo Plus. More devolution will come.
Yes.
I mean, you're opposed to it, but more devolution.
I'm not opposed to it.
Why were you opposed to it before?
No, we've now got
You were against the Scottish Parliament, Malcolm, yeah?
I thought you disliked all this.
You were an anti-devolutionist.
No, what I accept the political reality is we have a
But you were.
Well, of course I was. No, you have, I'm not pretending I
everybody
that's yes, but we're living in a new world now of devolved parliaments with 3 of the 4 parts of the United Kingdom. I'm very willing to look pragmatically, sensibly at any proposals for further devolution, but not Devo Max, because that would so hollow out the United Kingdom. There would be so little left that the Parliament of the United Kingdom was involved in regard to the north of the border. That, for all practical purposes, is the same as separately.
We just took
I'm sorry to sign the last point on this.
But I mean, just I mean, I think you're going to get more and more devolution. Every year, every 2 years, there's more and more devolution. And this is clearly coming. At the end of this road, you have an English Parliament. You may have a super Parliament, the United Kingdom is there, but you'd have effectively an English Parliament. And I think that's an admirable thing to have. So we need to accept that and discuss it. And the implication for
So I'm going to cut this off now as chairman. I'm sorry. We're going to bring in more of the audience. And can I also ask the panelists if they kindly, when they speak, just to stand up, so everyone can hear you. There was a gentleman at the back who had his hand up a long time ago. So
it strikes me how much this is always cast as an argument for democracy by the SNP and co, when really, as we've seen for the last 5 minutes of the migrant, it's actually damaged quite dangerously the British democracy. And it always is put forward as democratic. You have these very noble comparisons with struggles for freedom and democracy in Europe. And these you cast as a modern phenomenon, a modern sort of search for freedom, which has been opposed by empires and undemocratic institutions. But really, this is always happened. Local areas have always wanted an unfair deal, and the SNP, for everything it says, it stands for, historically has always strove to get Scottish people a better deal through double representation and the unfortunate state of affairs we have now. That's not to say devolution is fundamentally flawed, but surely to say that the only way to have democracy is to infinitely split things into smaller areas is not necessarily historically. It could happen, but it's not necessarily the pattern which we inevitably see, which they always do.
thank you, sir. Fraser.
I think you raise a brilliant point. There's an old phrase, that power devolved is power retained. And what the poor Scots have seen is not really power going to them, simply power moving from one branch of government to another, except this time run by even worse people than were running it before. Now, if you want to transfer power to the people, you simply do it through a mechanism which I fear a devolved or a maxi Scotland would never do, which is simply to have mechanisms which will cut tax, which will give people choice, which will give the average person in the street more power over his or her life, more power to choose what hospital they want to go to. The sort of powers which the Scottish Parliament has spent its time denying the people of Scotland, which is why Scottish waiting lists, rather than what Pete is saying, are actually worse than England's now, which they weren't when Scotland was devolved in the first place. So we must be very careful about the idea of how giving people power somehow basically means constitutional change. My position on constitutional change is pretty simple. I'm against it in any given circumstance. But when it comes to devolving power from government to the people, this is something I'm very much in favour of. We need to do more of it. And I want to see Scots given more power over their lives in that way, not by having another branch of government tell them what to do with a slightly different accent.
Pete.
Well, it's a very good point. And what we actually want is better democracy. We want the democracy that we decide. We've got a Conservative government in Scotland which are under reserve powers, which we didn't vote for. We didn't want that. It was overwhelmingly defeated. The Conservatives, as a party in Scotland, are down to their threadbare limit. They even took a further knock at the Scottish Parliament last time. You talk about democracy, sir. All I want is a government that my people in my nation elect. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. With independence, we will secure that all the time. You will get your government, we will get our government, they'll work together in partnership and relationship. But surely anybody would agree that it must be a proper right of self-determination. But if we go to the polls, decide to vote for a particular government, that's the government that we should get. Now, if the Scottish people are quite happy to have the Conservatives continue to run the reserved areas, that is up to them. They will have that choice in a few years' time. If they're happy for the welfare reform bill to go through, if they're happy that because of what the Conservative government are doing in health, there may be funding constraints in the Scottish Health Service, that will be their choice. What we will be putting to them is to say we've done all this stuff better than happens in England, we could do the other stuff better too. Give us the powers and we will improve your life and we will make our nation much more democratic.
Can I put it...
sorry, sir. The gentleman here is very patient in the line of green jacket. No, sorry. The gentleman behind you first.
Thank you. Given that defence is the first responsibility of any government, I wonder if I might draw out three of what I think is many, three micro defence points. But I've chosen them on the grounds that I think they perhaps raise a macro issue as well. So the first is I believe it's your policy that the regiments that carry a Scottish name in the British order of battle would be invited to join the Scottish Army. And I just wonder how that might work given the English and foreign Commonwealth soldiers that serve within those regiments. The macro point there being how do you disentangle the wider series of public and private institutions across the borders within which English are working in Scots institutions and vice versa, and those who may choose to not do so once independence has come. The second is, are you therefore committing, once the Scots, the Royal Scots, the Scots Guards, the Scotch Dragoon Guards have come across into your army, are you then responsible for the pensions of all of those who have served in those regiments previously? Are you responsible for the aftercare of all of those soldiers who have been injured? The macro point being, is that the same for all of the medics who have worked in the NHS on the northern side of the border? Is it the same for all the teachers who have taught in Scottish schools? Is that then Edinburgh's responsibility to care for them from then onwards? And the final point is that of intelligence sharing. A fundamental part of our national security is the trust that we, as Great Britain, enjoy with a number of partners around the world, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing community. I don't think necessarily that the United States would be immediately willing to share that information with Edinburgh until you've proven yourselves as trustworthy as being able to keep that information. A fundamental damage to your ability to protect yourselves and to predict what's coming in the future. The obvious macro point being you want to be a part of all of these international institutions, the EU, although not NATO. What is it that should make the international community immediately trust Edinburgh?
Thank you. Police and defence related questions and the knock-on effect. Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I just say on all these things. It's very curious. When I was writing a book about the history of England, and in writing about the history of England, I became terribly aware of the difference between England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, which I hadn't totally been before. They are clearly countries. As countries, they were never fully assimilated in the United Kingdom. We, sitting in London, you talk about this in Cardiff, Edinburgh, and Belfast, it's a totally different conversation. It's a totally different conversation. You can't imagine how different it is. They were never assimilated. They regard themselves as a part of a confederacy of convenience. And the Irish decided they no longer wanted to belong to it. And I personally believe the Scottish, I don't think the Welsh will ever leave, but I think the Scottish probably will leave. It's a sign of a mature confederacy, as of a mature empire, that it knows at what point it evolves in a particular direction, usually in the direction of rediscovering the identities of its component parts, in this case the component parts of the British Isles. But the objections to the splitting up of the confederacy are always overwhelmingly convincing in the detail. And I was in Prague when this was happening into Czechoslovakia. There wasn't a conceivable reason why Slovakia should become independent. The arguments were overwhelming. Yet it did. It didn't collapse. It's done rather well. It had what's called the independence bounce, or the separatist bounce. The same was true to a certain extent in Ireland. It's true almost all over the world. It's certainly true in Yugoslavia. They aren't exactly the same, but the idea that this is inconceivable, because we can think of 100 reasons why it's stupid of the Scots to vote for it, is not the point. If they vote for it, fine.
I'll take another question. Jan at the front. Afterwards.
Thank you. A couple of points on the economy. would an independent Scotland preserve the currency union, which if so would beg the question of why they would go independent, join the euro or have their own separate Scottish currency? And allied to that, nobody, I think, has yet mentioned the Barnett formula, which is perhaps unsurprising, but how would an independent Scotland be able to sustain the current generous levels of expenditure for student tuition fees and whatsoever without adding to the tax burden of their citizens?
Especially when it doesn't have its own currency.
First of all, I just would like to back up everything that Simon said about the type of debate we're having here. It's great. I enjoyed coming along here and responding to some of the points from my English colleagues, but you would never have a debate like this in Scotland. It would be, for a start, when you would show these hands at first, it would be probably more SNP members, because we're pretty good at filling out these sort of audiences, as Fraser knows when he's turned up at these debates. So sometimes when it comes in here, it is a bit parallel universe. It's about the type of debate that we're having, and I know that it's great to respond to some of these points that have been made. I didn't get the opportunity to reply to the gentleman in the green jacket. Yes, we would take care of all these things. All these things are our responsibilities. Everything is decided and determined at Westminster across the road will be handled and managed by the Scottish Parliament. That's what's called independence. Now, we hear a lot about defence, and you know, I sometimes think it's not always the Unionist's strongest point, though. They always seem to think that it is. We've got something like a 5.3 billion underspend in defence in the course of the past 5 years, according to what we should have had by our population share. We're badly let down by the UK military footprint in Scotland. Now, what's the size of the Scottish Defence Force going to be like post-independence? I don't know. I've got no idea. It's going to be up to the first government of an independent Scotland. There could be a party standing for the Scottish government, which will say, we'll call it the Scottish Militarist Party. And they might say, we want to spend 20% of GDP on defence. If they win that election, that's what they'll do. That's what independence means. It means you're in charge and in control of these decisions. Now, what we'll do in the SNP at 2013, and we've concluded our green paper, we'll bring forward a prospectus, a full prospectus, which will answer every single question, and not more than that, every single detailed question. But let's get at this stage just now what independence does mean. It means taking decisions and assuming the responsibility for issues and responsibilities that are handled down here. Now, the economy, and I'm really glad that we got that one. Scotland's got 8.4% of the population of the United Kingdom. We get 9.3% in spending in return. It's great, isn't it? That's what pays for all these services. But do you know how much we give in total when it comes to the economic take from Scotland? 9.6%. We are subsidising the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, Fraser scoffs. We saw that in the GERS reviews last week. Government expenditure and revenue in Scotland. We have 8.4% of the population. We secure 9.3% spending, and 9.6% of the tax take comes from Scotland. So we are it's the full absolute resource from Scotland. So what we're actually doing is subsidising the rest of the United Kingdom. This is worth £510 to every man, woman and child in Scotland. That is what we get in terms of this union dividend. So please, once again, let's not.
Would you take an intervention?
I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Thank you. I was grateful. I don't think you'll disagree that that oil is going to substantially run out in 20, 30 years' time. How will these sums add up thereafter?
This is the great thing about oil. Somehow we're cursed by having oil. We're told that, you know, it's so unfortunate. Imagine basing your economy on oil as if we've got this misfortune of discovering it off our shore. It's always going to run out. I've been told since I was a little babe in arms that the oil is going to run out. We've got 40 years left of oil. We're halfway through oil revenues and oil reserves. Even without oil being in that picture, Scotland can more than pay its way. We will come to independence as the best endowed nation ever to secure its sovereignty because of our natural resources.
Sorry, sir. Very quickly back to the question.
The question is,
sorry, you want to come back?
Quite simply, which currency?
We have said repeatedly in the course of the past years, I'm sure you've heard this on occasion when the First Minister has been interviewed, we will use the pound, we will retain the pound sterling. Now,
that's not independence. You know, how can you be independent? How can you be independent if you're going to still rely on the pound?
Right.
It's impossible.
Well, thank you once again for that, sir. There's 40 nations around the world that share a currency union. And that Scotland will be one of these. Now, is it of interest to Scotland to retain the pound? Yes, it is, because the industry and the economic activity in Scotland would like to have that stability and would want to ensure that that continues. Is it in the interests of the rest of the United Kingdom to retain a sterling zone throughout the British Isles? Yes, of course it is, because of the reserves that we give from North Sea or from whisky alone, which brings in a fantastic amount to UK's balance of trade. So it's in the interest of both the rest of the United Kingdom and Scotland to retain a sterling zone, and both will benefit from that. Do we control interest rates? No. Is the rest of the United Kingdom in charge of interest rates? Last time I looked, I thought it was the Bank of England that had the independence to ensure what interest rates were going to be determined. Will we then have another clutch of economic powers to ensure that our economy is growing? Yes, of course we would. I mean, so like what we would have is a situation which would be the benefits of Scottish industry, which would ensure like forward going, and we would work together with the rest of the United Kingdom in a currency zone, a sterling zone, which would obviously benefit.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm very keen to get as many people to speak as possible. So there's a gentleman here who's been waiting desperately to ask a question, and then the gentleman there, and then the gentleman there, and then we'll open up.
I'm going to keep my question quite quick and quite linked to that. If an independent Scotland uses the pound and faces a kind of systemic shock to the economy like in 2008, who would you expect to act as the lender of last resort of the Scottish economy?
Fraser. Nicola Sturgeon, the Deputy SNP leader, was asked that question in Times debate on this theme 2 weeks ago. She gave a brilliant answer. Scotland would be so prudent, she said, that we wouldn't need a lender of last resort. Isn't that brilliant? I mean, when Fred the Shred went to Alistair Darling saying, look, I've got a bit of a problem, can you help me? Can you imagine what he would have done if he'd gone to Alex Salmond and asked him that, given that RBS's debt was something like 3,000% of Scotland's GDP? And before we think that Alex Salmond would behave more rationally, was a letter which was recently uncovered, which he wrote to Fred the Shred about head of this calamitous ABM deal, saying, brilliant, go all for it. If there's anything I can do as First Minister to help you with this buyout, let me know and I'll do it. Now this goes to show the true peril Scotland would face, which is a cosy political class trying to crawl up to the bankers. When those two get together, you know bad things are going to happen. And it is simply the case that it was a bailout which yoked Scotland and England together with a Darien disaster last time. It wouldn't be too long before Scotland, which has got a great banking sector, well not much of it anymore, you know, of course you have a systemic threat like that. And this is the problem with independence. The more questions you ask, sir, you asked about the oil, for example. I mean, is rule by London so much better than rule by OPEC, which would be the alternative? I mean, the more questions you ask, the more you realise there aren't any answers, which is why independence, for all its romantic advantages, is essentially lunacy for Scotland, which is why no Scottish referendum will ever deliver a yes result. What Pete and his friends are wanting is option 3 in the referendum, which is more devolution. They know the Scottish people do not agree with them, and they will lose any referendum on a yes or no ballot.
Thanks, Fraser. Gentleman there.
Yes, thank you. It's a very straightforward question for our SNP contributor. If Scotland is so committed to independence, why does it not want to withdraw from the European Union? That's the policy of the UK Independence Party. Why isn't it the policy of the Scottish Independence Party?
Well, we don't have the same status as all the other self-governed small European nations within Europe. Like Denmark's a great example for us, which we look at occasionally when we're trying to determine how we want to take a number of issues forward. I mean, Denmark's not trying to withdraw from the European Union. Why does Scotland want to withdraw from the European Union? It's a bizarre question.
You're withdrawing from NATO, why are you doing that?
Well, we're currently having a look at all options available for us.
No, you're not. That's your policy.
We're currently having a look at all options when it comes to issues to do with defence. But I mean, it's a factious argument that somehow we will be somehow transferring London power to Brussels power. We've already got both just now. What we're doing is getting rid of the Westminster bit.
Sir.
I can't claim to match the hyper flights of oratory that some of our speakers have risen to. But if I may perhaps play the part of the inconvenient legalist for the moment.
As long as it's short.
I realise, Sam, that may be something of a contradiction in terms, but I'll try my best. Looking back to my European experience, which I hope is not too distant, the United Kingdom, its legal status, is that of a single member state, as defined in the Treaty of 2009. Which transformed the European Union into a sovereign body with its own legal personality. And not merely in the articles of the treaty, but in the preamble as well. which, so far as I'm aware, cannot be altered without an intergovernmental conference, which is not the easiest thing to arrange, and I doubt whether they'd be very favourable. Secondly, Mr. Wishart mentioned Lord Justice Mackenzie Stewart, which I must say didn't surprise me. We might have had Professor Neil McCormack as well. But before coming here, I did arm myself by consulting a few German legal professors with experience in European legal matters. And they had no doubt that Scotland was a region and that a region had no right of secession unless explicitly provided by the text of the treaty. Thirdly, parliamentarians, surely, both in Westminster and Holyrood, are European Union citizens, particularly after the 2009 treaty, and as such are required to observe the laws and judgments of the European institutions and are subject to them. I wonder whether all of our speakers do not in some way partake of the illusion of sovereignty, in that they presume that any British institution, be it in London or in Edinburgh, any longer has the power to unilaterally decide these matters. I believe there is a weight of legal opinion which suggests it does not. And one last final, and I stress to you, Sam, brief.
It's Nick.
You picked me. Nationalism in Europe, and I speak as someone who's partly German, and I have to admit, concealed the fact from certain conservative audiences for years. Nationalism has a very bad reputation in Europe. A very bad reputation. It has a very bad history. What is more, finally, I think that the European climate of opinion on secession, so far as other sovereign governments which would have to decide it, would be most unfavourable. You would be asking a French president, an Italian prime minister, a Spanish prime minister, without even getting into the bloodshed that the concession of the principle of secession would cause in the Balkans, to accept sawing off the branch in which they would themselves sit. They would say to you,
thank you.
grow up
Sorry,
to
can
British,
you finalise?
go home, work out a federal solution, and don't bother us with nationalism anymore, because we've moved beyond it.
Thank you. Simon, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I'm not having that Euroscepticism confirmed. I'm sorry if this upsets some Europeans. That's for lawyers to sort out, as George Bush used to say. I mean, the issue is, if you, and I take the point about nationalism. I mean, there's a whole period about, the entire period of the growth of the European Union. Nationalism was the bugbear, the dirty word,
still is,
and still is in many quarters. But the fact is, if you constantly abuse subordinate peoples, they will become nationalist. I genuinely don't think we'd be sitting here if it hadn't been for the poll tax. I think the persistent misgovernment of Scotland from London, the denial of devolution, Malcolm was so keen on, was one of the reasons why nationalism, properly so called in Scotland and in Wales, began to move in the direction that the Irish nationalists had moved in. It is a matter, I'll come back to my previous words, a matter of the maturing of the democracy, that it can respect subordinate peoples and their desire for self-government and a sense of identity. I just think this is going to happen. I think it's very important that as Westminster matures, it tackles the questions which lead you to slightly giggle and snigger when they're made. But I think eventually they will become substantive points. The very fact that in Scotland at the moment and in Wales at the moment, there's no conceivable going back to pre-devolution days. And every time there's a poll of one sort or another in Scotland and Wales, they want more power. Now, there must be a point, I agree, when more power has to come to the point where it's looking more and more like independence. Independence in Europe is a question of layers and tiers. It's a millefeuille of power. But it means something to the people who are claiming it. And I think at the moment you're finding that the Scots people, the Welsh people much less so, are claiming it. And one day they will get it.
Thank you. We've got time, I'll come back to you now. So we've got time for some three last questions. I'm keen to wrap up. So gentleman, second row, gentleman at the back, and gentleman over there.
I sit firmly in the no camp, but my question nevertheless is for those against this. Because I partly think that the unionist parties are to blame for putting the SNP in a position where they can force this vote. It's not easy, it's not difficult to understand how the Scottish National Party can capture popular imagination when it is making easier decisions on things like pharmacy bills or education, whilst body swerving the more difficult and unpopular fiscal decisions. and it certainly isn't difficult to wind up people south of the border to the extent where they are apathetic about remaining part of the Union. So my question is, if Fraser's coalition comes to boot and the Scottish people throw out the motion for independence, how do unionist parties, or should unionist parties, engage more north of the border so they have more of a mandate?
Well, when this happens, and remember the SNP are gunning for a middle option. That's what this whole thing is about. It's not really about separation. But there is plenty you can do. Now, I suspect I differ from Sir Malcolm here in that I do favour Scotland having a greater say over its own budget. I care passionately about what's going wrong in Scotland, and a large part of it is a huge government which has stopped growing out of all proportion to its usefulness. I think if the Scottish government had to actually raise the money it spends, then there'd be more pro-growth things in Scotland. So I will be in favour of moving towards a system of Basque-style fiscal autonomy. Now, Sir Malcolm will say that's 9/10 of the way to independence, perhaps, but I think there is room for changing it. And right now, we cannot be in a consistent whining position where all the Scottish politicians do is moan about how little they're getting from England and try to spend as much of it as they conceivably can and judge their success only in terms of how much money they spend. It's not good for Scotland, and it's causing active poverty and misery in Glasgow, Dundee, in many parts of our deprived cities. So I would like to see that changed. I think that even this is an ongoing process. We don't want a Quebec-style constant referenda, but I think there is a lot of room for improvement in what we've got right now. Thank you. Question at the back.
I've got a question for Mr. Wishart on self-determination as opposed to nationalism. In your view, Scotland doesn't feel represented in Westminster, but could it not be the case that in independent Scotland, communities within Scotland don't feel represented by an independent Scottish government? And could that then lead to further breakup of Scotland on the basis of self-determination?
Well, I don't think we need to take long to answer that. There's certainly no evidence of that whatsoever. I think what we're just trying to secure and achieve in Scotland is just to have control over the reserved issues that we don't have just now, because we believe very much that we could run them better, that we could make more of a national contribution if we were in charge of that. There is no desire or demand whatsoever for any. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen any letters, questions, or anything raised which suggests that there's other parts of Scotland that would like to, have some sort of form of self-government. There is a cohesion in Scotland, and I take great objection. I think there was a gentleman there who talked about this ugly nationalism. 34 countries have become independent since 1990. That's something to be welcomed and congratulated. That's 34 countries that have got the governments and the political regimes that they want. That's something
very bad consequences.
But none of them are going to go back. No country which has become independent, it's all of a sudden said, oh dear, we made a dreadful mistake here, let's put together the former union we were in. That's never ever happened.
Sorry, excuse me, on the floor.
And to suggest somehow that the Scottish nationalism, the civic nationalism that we try to pursue is in any way caught up with this nasty image that you're trying to present this evening, I think is below the current debate that we're having. Scotland will become independent and will decide on its independence because they will decide that decisions made in Scotland are best made by the Scottish people and a government that represents them, and it will be exclusively that. It's called civic nationalism, and that's the model that we will pursue.
The gentleman in the second row, if you'd like to take on this discussion, you can contact Mr. Wishart on his parliamentary email address, no problem. Last, final question.
Yeah. I just want to say I was really surprised at the SNP's sort of fundamental reasons for independence being that we're still British, or Scottish, we're part of Britain. I just don't know where that argument ends, because I could speak to someone who lives in Newcastle who could say, well, I'm a Geordie, and I'm being ruled by a Conservative party that I didn't vote for. So it's kind of similar to the previous point, but that's fundamentally flawed. I'm really surprised that you're using that argument, because, like the previous point made, where does that end? Because the same would apply to someone in the home counties under the previous Labour regime. They certainly didn't vote for a Labour government. So I think we need to rethink that fundamental point.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask each of the speakers if they'd like to answer that question or they'd like to summarise very, very briefly, because I'm conscious everyone wants to get off now, or not, their final remarks, and then we can have a vote. Samantha.
Thank you very much. I want to make 2 points. First of all, in relation to what Simon said, he implied that the growth of nationalism was as a result of wicked Tory government. Historically, it couldn't be more wrong. The growth of nationalism began when Winnie Ewing won Hamilton, and when I was first elected to Parliament in 1974, then 30% of the Scottish electorate voted for the SNP. And you should realise also that, and this is partly what Peter's saying as well, that Peter keeps talking about 34 countries have become independent for the last 20 years. Yes, he's quite right. And almost every single one of them has previously been in a dictatorship which they wish to be liberated from. Half these countries were in the Soviet Union, the other half were in former Yugoslavia, and in various other parts of the world like South Sudan. Ask yourself which countries that have enjoyed true democracy have broken up. Quebec almost did, and Quebec in several referendums consistently voted against independence, and the independence support is lower than it's been for a long time. Look at the history of the last 100 years in Europe, in democratic Europe. There are only 2 examples in the last 100 years in democratic Europe when a country has broken away. One is obviously Ireland, with the circumstances of oppression. The only other example is Norway and Sweden.
Czechoslovakia.
No, well, Czechoslovakia, no, I'm sorry. Czechoslovakia only had 20 years of union after the First World War. You then had Munich, you had Nazi occupation, and then Soviet control. There was no natural, we have had 300 years of successful union. And I make one final point in the time available, the point that I challenge Pete Wishart, what were going to be the real practical benefits? And he has said again and again, we are a nation, we want to rule ourselves. And he said specifically, and I noted this down, we are unique in that we are a nation who does not govern themselves, who's not an independent state. Well, let me tell you, we're not unique. One other example I can think of is England. England is not an independent state. England has not been an independent state since 1707. If they'd been an independent state, they wouldn't have had to put up Gordon Brown as Prime Minister. Not to mention a dozen other examples that I could give. And the whole point of the Union has been, and Ireland is special, even if Simon doesn't choose to recognise that. So far as Scotland, England and Wales are concerned, we have chosen over 300 years of peace, old enemies of peace, to share political institutions. And my final comment is this. What message does it send to Europe and to the wider world? We're living through an age of greater globalization. Europe is struggling to come in various ways closer together, whatever your views on Europe. Everyone agrees there should at the very least be more cooperation. What signal does it send? If the most successful political union that the world has actually seen, it is the most successful, Scotland and England, old enemies for hundreds of years, living in peace and friendship and great prosperity over the last 20 years, what message does it send? If the nationalist case was accepted, that we now, despite that, we share so little in common with England. We are prepared to share our political institutions with the rest of Europe. But the idea that we continue to share our political institutions, just Scotland and England, on this island, that is so reprehensible. That is so destructive of our aspirations. That is going to do so much damage to our prosperity. That is an insult to our nationhood. It would be sad, but it's more than sad, it's tragic. And it is unfortunate that this should have happened. I'm confident we're going to win this referendum, this is going to be rejected. I don't really doubt that. I think the objective has to be, what happened on the AV vote, on the AV referendum, that we win it by such a big majority, that you guys realise that you may govern Scotland well, but you do not have the support of the people of Scotland. It's worth remembering that in the last 30 years, since Winnie Ewing won Hamilton, virtually every opinion poll, when asked in Scotland, do you want independence? 30, 33, 34, 35%. Against it, 45, 50, 55, 60. The opinion polls are no different today, 12 months after Salmon's great victory, than they were 30 years ago. I do bear that in mind.
Thank you. Pete.
Well, thank you for that. And
really enjoyed this evening. It's not very often that we have a discussion and debate about Scottish independence with such a, like a unaligned crowd and audience who debate these things. But I do value all your questions and your interest in our nation. But I think what we will take away from this evening is it will be up to the Scottish people. It will be their decision and their decision alone. I know Westminster want to interfere and get involved and push what type of question should be asked, when that question should be asked, and who should be asked it. But this will be a referendum that will be held in Scotland. The Scottish people will get a prospectus. They will be asked to consider a number of options as they choose their constitutional future. This is a one-in-a-generation opportunity that we have to go forward, to take things forward, to get the government we want, to take over the control of the reserve powers which reside at Westminster. We probably won't get another shot at this for the last 25 years. Malcolm says there's no great desire for this. The opinion polls now have got the support for Scottish independence knocking around 40%. We will be launching our campaign after the local elections in May, where we will bring together not just the Scottish National Party, but Artists for Independence, Pensioners for Independence, Asians for Independence. The whole civic movement of Scotland will be coming together under this great prospectus that we will secure our independence and we will take responsibility for our own affairs. We will grant ourselves the powers which will be able to grow our economy and will make our own international contribution. It's going to be a fantastic debate, and I don't reckon many of you will share the ambitions that we have for our nation, the way that we want to take this forward, where we want to join the community nations around the world. Scotland is a nation. We're an ancient nation. The constraints of the United Kingdom no longer work for us. We have to make other political choices in the way forward. Devolution has been a massive, absolute success. Everything has suggested that. That's why the SNP won a convincing, overwhelming majority back in May, and that's why there will be more powers for the Scottish Parliament, whether that's going to be independence or further devolution. They will be moving on and it will continue to move on. But I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that come the autumn of 2014, when asked the future the Scottish people want, they will opt for independence, they will do it with enthusiasm, and they'll do it in large numbers. And I'm sure when we do achieve that, you'll lose your surly lodger. What was it? Fraser went on about the whining Scots. You'll lose your surly lodger, the whining Scots, and you'll have a very good neighbour. Thank you.
It's funny listening to Pete talking about we Scots and the ambition we have for our country. You know, I like to think of myself as a Scot. I am hugely ambitious for my country, and I'm delighted to be able to speak in this defence tonight. I go back to my earlier question: what problem has Scotland got to which independence is a solution? If you think back to everything that's been said tonight, I don't think you've heard an answer, and to me that's quite telling. Really, it's all about the nationalists and their sort of peculiar pipe dreams which are not shared by the majority, and never have been and never will be. It is, you know, and also it's interesting Pete saying that he hasn't had an audience like this. The Nats are very good at stuffing debates like this and people cheering it. And when it comes to a proper debate about independence, really the hard questions are going to be asked, the questions which all of you have asked time and time again tonight, and there will be no answer in the referendum debate, just as there is no answer tonight. That is why, as a Scot, I am very ambitious, I am very optimistic about the future of my country. It's called Britain, and long may it last. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It is interesting to compare the debate we have about Scotland with the debate we might have had about Wales. There'd be no one in the room. The reason why there are people in the room is it's a real debate, it's a real question, and the things that we've been discussing, like the quality of the Scots government and so on, are real questions, because one of the reasons why it's so poor is so many Scots have come down here. In my experience, expatriates are never separatists. They like the fact that they can be Scots in London and rulers. I'm not particularly pro-Scots, and nor am I pro-Welsh. I want to get rid of them. I'm English, and it's really for England that I'm speaking here today, rather than for Scotland. Scotland can look after itself. I think it should look after itself, and it will look after itself. I just make one last point. Fraser said, and Fraser was right, that the Scots devolution will continue. It'll go to Devo Plus, then Devo Max. You will have the sorts of independence that the Bast have already got. Catalans have got, the Galicians have got, the Aldostans have got, it's all over Europe, this debate. But they've got it, and it will continue here. There is just no way you're going to go back towards centralism. You're going to go further towards devolution. Malcolm is right in saying that if you do that, and Malcolm is an old-fashioned centralist, he's a great centralist, he's in a government that was fanatically big government, London-based, metropolitan, anti-devolution and so on. He was wrong. He may now be right, I don't know, but I think he's still wrong. But he's right in saying that if you go down the path that Fraser wants to go down, you will lead inexorably to independence. It will. They're both right for different reasons. At the end of this day, you're going to have Scottish independence, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I know the answer to this, but we shall see if there has been a swing since we started this debate. If you can raise your...
Can you repeat the motion?
The notion is, it's time for an independent Scotland. If you are pro that motion, can you raise your green card? A few. And anti the motion? Well, you've won over a few people. It leaves me to thank all our speakers and for all of you to come in the traditional way. Thank you.